Welcome to Like a Champion podcast, where we talk to leaders from all walks of life. I'm your host, Wes Shelton. This is episode 1. We talk with Danny Kanell, former FSU Seminole college football star, NFL veteran of 7 years, commentator currently with Fox Sports and Sirius XM Radio. Danny is a family man, self-proclaimed turtleneck wearer, and just an all-around great guy. I very much enjoyed this episode with Danny. He talks about reinventing himself after football, what he would have done differently in his career, the famous choke-a-doke where Florida State came back to tie Florida after a 32-3 deficit, how he was nearly benched in that game, as you might imagine, and, of course, the art of the comeback. So this was an episode. It was my first one. I really enjoyed talking to Danny and the conversation and sort of the brutal honesty and transparency that he offers in his life and the lessons that he's learned and the lumps that he's taken. So hope you enjoy episode 1. This is Like a Champion. So little background on you. I want to say, obviously professional football player, 6 years in the NFL, Florida State Seminole, 2 years as a starter there, 4-year letterman and Florida State playing for Bobby Bowden, who's a legendary coach. After football, you jumped into broadcasting, and maybe give me a little update on just what you're up to now.
So I basically get paid to talk about sports. I mean, that's what I do, a lot of talking, probably too much talking, because on August 24th, as we sit here a few weeks away from there, I'll be going back to my fall schedule, which is really my crazy time of year when I kind of say goodbye to my kids and my wife. I'm like, hey, daddy's going to be a little irritated. He's going to be a little bit tired, just give me a little bit more space. So from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., I have a Sirius XM show that's on ESPNU radio. That's all college sports, just college football, which I love. I do it with Greg McElroy, who works at ESPN. I worked with him at ESPN. We'll do that on Sirius XM. It's on ESPNU radio from 7 to 10 a.m. Then from 10 to 1 p.m., I'll do various hits on CBS Sports HQ, which is their digital product. So on your phone, on your iPad, on your TV, smart TV, you can put the app up there. It's talking NFL and college football primarily, like, breaking down the NFL point spreads, whether injury news, kind of not hot takes, but a little bit more of like opinion-based stuff, but a lot of analytical information too. Then at 1 o'clock, I do my other radio show from 1 to 3 o'clock on Mad Dog Radio with Steve Torrey. That's Monday through Friday from 1 to 3, and we talk all sports. So we'll do Major League Baseball, NFL, college football. That's probably, we try to serve sports fans, like the American sports fan. And I know you're a big soccer guy. We don't do a lot of soccer. I'd say we go to like the generic, like,
except for when you pick on it, because I've heard some of it.
Exactly. I have too much of a troll in me for soccer. It's so easy to poke them. They get so mad. But we serve the generic sports fan, like whatever kind of the hot topic of the day. If LeBron, missed a 3-pointer to win, does he have the clutch gene? Like kind of that type of conversation. Baseball, we do all sports in that one. So basically I'm kind of talking from 7 a.m. until 3 p.m. And then after that, I do a podcast as well that's it's just launched, just joined that. It's the Cover 3 podcast, all college football, that I'll do. That's via CBS Sports with them. And then I do TV for CBS Sports as well, calling games on the weekends. Of course, right now with college football up in the air, I don't have my schedule yet, but I called 8 games last year for them on the weekends. So it's a pretty full boat. Like, it's a full slate, especially during college football, where I'm usually working 6 days a week. And on the 7th, I'm either traveling home from somewhere or kind of watching a lot of NFL, because it's, what I have to do. And I love it. It's awesome. It's busy. But it's a lot of talking. Like, it's a lot of talking, but it's great. And I love it.
And is there a lot of prep for that, the shows and
So I get that question a lot, and it is, but it's kind of like, it's just full immersion. So, and there's a lot of carryover. So like, if I pay attention and if I'm constantly reading, like, I know a lot of people are on Facebook for political stuff, or you get your news from there. I am on Twitter, like, to a fault, almost nonstop, constantly, and not to hear, whatever Joey Bag of Donuts in New Jersey from his basement giving some hot take. I'm basically getting my news and updates and injury, coaches on the hot seat, there's a ton of great stats and information. Like, ESPN has a great site, a Twitter handle. So does CBS. So does Fox. So it's just like this full immersion where I'm just always in it. So it doesn't feel like prep to me. It just feels like a way of life. Like if you ask me today, hey, I should be pretty much by 10 a.m. when we're recording this, pretty much dialed in on any and every like kind of major sports topic that happened. And it even like when I'm on the air at 7 a.m. with McElroy, it's kind of happening on the fly. So we'll be talking to each other. And then all of a sudden, with all these players opting out because of COVID, it's, hey, well, Gregory Rousseau just opted out at the University of Miami. All right, let's break it down. So, and then like that conversation will be a part probably of my radio show at 1:00 as well. And then it'll absolutely be a big topic on the Cover 3 podcast, which is all college football. So it kind of just all intertwines. And it's like I'm just constantly plugged into the sports world, which my wife is always like, you got to unplug. And I'm like, well, then I'll get behind. And you don't want to get too far behind because, as you're talking about sports through the seasons, you need to be able to recall, all right, if the Hurricanes are struggling this year, well, it's probably because Gregory Rousseau, opted out this season. So it's like just one big kind of knowledge base that you pull from throughout the year. So it's just kind of constant prep. It's not like, okay, I take 2 hours every day. It's just living the sports environment 24/7.
Yeah. So you mentioned one thing I wanted to ask about, and I was going to maybe hit it later, but you're married. You have three beautiful daughters. You came from a family with three other sisters. And you're in a demanding business, especially like you said, as college football season starts, like how do you unplug? Like, are there sort of practices or rituals to where daddy's maybe not home a lot, but when he is, the phone goes away or, whatever. Like I know a lot of people that I deal with struggle with that work-life balance. It's very demanding and
it is. And it can be extremely demanding. It can be extremely taxing. It'll be more challenging when I start the radio because in the morning I like having breakfast with my daughters or possibly driving them to school, right? Like it's something that I really enjoy doing, like having those little conversations in the car. I will miss those. And so the college show, I usually only do during football season, which is usually from August till February. We go like till, probably right up to signing day. So I get that time in the off season, but during the season, because I really pride myself on being the best dad that I possibly can. So for the most part, when I'm 7 to 3 and sometimes 4, if I have to do that podcast in the afternoon, I'm pretty much setting things down as soon as I'm done at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and putting it aside. So from that window from 4 till, usually after dinner, we're usually like till when games tip off at 7:30 or 8. Mm-hmm. I'm usually fully immersed in kids from that time. Like I'll go, whether it's I'm taking them to a practice, whether I'm taking my daughter to play golf with me. Like that, so I feel like I've sacrificed a lot of personal interests that I had. Like I used to be, like, I used to play golf all the time. And then when I was single, or even when I was just married, I probably went golfing 4 times a week. Like I would go every Saturday and Sunday morning. There was a standing tee time at 8. I would go Wednesday and Friday afternoons at 1:30. There was always a game. So I'd go over there and I loved it. It was awesome. But like when I had kids, I just kind of sacrificed that. I was like, you know what? Like what am I really going to value? Am I going to value the time with the guys, which is good. And there is value in that. It is a good escape to get away. Or am I going to invest this window in my children? And I've made a concerted effort. I've lost like of golf trips. I don't get that many in. I don't get to do many things like that. But to me, it was just so worth it to sacrifice some of those things, which are fun. But like in the bigger picture, like when my daughters are gone to college, I'll have plenty of time to go back to the golf games and do all those things again. But I really wanted to invest fully in my children and their activities. Cause my dad was a great example. Like my dad's an orthopedic surgeon. He's in sports medicine. He was busy. He was a little bit, because I do think I have like a workaholic tendency in me. Like I like working. I like being busy. My dad had the same. My dad wasn't a golfer, which a lot of doctors are. He wasn't a fisherman. he was either working or he was with his kids. So I really had an example of my dad that kind of laid the groundwork for the kind of dad I wanted to be too. So I had a good example, which helped tremendously.
Yeah. So that window during the season when you're just totally slammed, there's that like 4 o'clock to like 7 o'clock, 7:30, where you're completely dedicated to the kids and that's their time.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like I'm just, fully daddy daycare from 4 to 7. There'll be times when I'll just want to get away and maybe go work out.
Right.
But I've actually got this new routine for the last couple months, and I've been getting up super early, like at 5:30 to get my workout in before, so that I don't have to do it from 4 to 7. So I can have more time to kind of just relax with the kids or go golfing. Or my middle daughter, Dylan, wants to be surfer. So I've been taking her over to the beach and just getting in the water with her and letting her surf and just spending time with them in what they like to do. And I think it's valuable. Now it's going to get more challenging because they're getting to an age when, my oldest just turned 13. She's getting to an age where she doesn't like hanging out with dad that much, the roles might reverse. So it's like all of a sudden she wants to be with her friends and I have to tug on her and say, well, hold on a second, dad wants some time too. And it's all a balance that there is no handbook. There is no manual. Different people, have different schedules. I'm just trying to do my best. Like that's all I talk to Courtney, my wife, about it all the time. Hey, we're just trying to do our best. Like, what do we think is best for our family? We don't have any judgment towards any other family if they do things differently, because there really isn't an answer. You could have parents that spend all day, all night with their kids, invest fully, and their kid goes off the deep end. You do your best, and you try to instill in them good values and treat people the right way, and kind of trust God with the rest. And that's really been our kind of motto as kind of parents and trying to parent in this crazy world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to jump back into rewind a little bit back to, the NFL, your pro career, back at FSU. Kind of, I'd love to hear I think you spent 6 years in the NFL with the Falcons and the Broncos.
7. You keep shortchanging, man. Don't shortchange me. I had seven, but it was weird because I was actually
blame it on Wikipedia.
Right, exactly. Wikipedia, the source for everybody's news.
Yeah.
I got to change that because I can actually go edit that. I should make myself a 10-year pro.
That's right.
Yeah. But it's weird because I was basically a professional athlete for 10 years, but 7 of those were the NFL. So here's the way my career arc went. Played at Florida State, as you mentioned, played football and baseball at Florida State my first 2 years, then gave up baseball to become the starting quarterback. Bobby Bowden wanted me to make that commitment, and I understood it. And I was like, all right, then got drafted, played 3 years with the Giants where I was drafted. Then I went to Atlanta, played 2 years. So that's 5. And at the time I had off-season surgery. I had knee surgery at the end of that season. And so I was rehabbing and I was working out, lifting a ton of weights, getting pretty jacked. Like probably the best shape I've ever been in because I was rehabbing. I was kind of forced to. But at the time, my nephews were probably 12 or 13. They were big into baseball. And my first love was always baseball. Like I loved playing baseball. And so I was playing with them. I was pitching.
You were drafted, right?
Yeah. I got drafted twice in baseball, once out of high school and then once after my junior year at Florida State. So this is 5 years in the NFL. I'm 27 years old, 28. And I felt like I had more left in me in the NFL, but I was just burned out. Like I was tired of getting beat up. I was on bad. When I was in Atlanta, we were 4-12 and 5-11, and it sucks the life out of you. Anytime I did get to play, Chris Chandler was the starter, and he had a knack for getting some like little injury, but it was just enough to take him out of a game. And it was always when we were playing like the Tampa 2, like the legit, not the Tampa 2 that you hear about. It was actually the Tampa Bay Bucks with Derek Brooks, Warren Sapp, John Lynch. He got hurt against them. So I had to play like the whole second half against them when we're down. The greatest show on turf. We played the St. Louis Rams. We're getting blown out like 28-7. He goes down with a hamstring. So I'm having to come into all these games when all you're doing is throwing and the defense is just teeing off on you, and we weren't any good. So I was just banged up, and I was kind of just tired of the grind of the NFL. And I'm out here playing baseball. I'm like, man, this makes me feel young again. Like I loved baseball. So I mentioned it to my dad. I was like, and I'm 27. I'm like, should I try to do baseball again? And my dad was like, sure. He's like, why not? I had made some money, so finances weren't an issue. I was still young enough where it was like, why not do something fun? So that's the way I approached it, was I want to see what happens. So I started working out up at the Doyle Baseball Academy. It's outside of like DeLand, Florida, in the middle of nowhere. And I go work out with this Doyle baseball kid. Brian Doyle played the New York Yankees, and he has like a camp for kids that they would go train and stuff. So I'll never forget, I stayed at like this beat up old Holiday Inn, like motel, like the 2 stories with the balcony, and you park in front, you keep an eye on your car in case it gets robbed. Yeah. And I remember the first I checked in there, and they were all fired up because they're like, sure. They're like, the deal was with Brian Doyle was like, we're going to work you out for a month, and then we'll see kind of how far you progress. Is it worth your time? Should we do this or not? So I never forget my first workout. I get up at like 7 in the morning and I go, and there's like all these like 8th graders, like 14, 15-year-olds. And I'm basically like doing calisthenics next to all these little kids. And I'm thinking like, what am I doing? It's hot as blazes. So all these kids, I'm like, what am I doing? But I just kind of immersed myself in it, started throwing, started hitting, and I loved it. And so I did that for a month in the middle of nowhere. And at the end, like they were seeing some development. They were like, you know what? They're like, you could probably do this. If you really want to, you can do this. We can help you find a spot. So when a month goes by, and Brian Doyle knew Rick Cerrone, who was a catcher on the Yankees, who he played for the same organization. And Rick Cerrone owned the Newark Bears, who were a minor league team in the independent baseball in the Atlantic League. And so he called up, and he was like calling around looking for opportunities, and he called Rick Cerrone. Jose Canseco was on the Newark Bears with his brother Ozzie, his twin brother Ozzie, and he quit and walked out in the team mid-season. So they had 2 roster spots that were open that would possibly fill a DH kind of bigger body, like first and third baseman player that they could use. And the Atlantic League is not tied to any organization, so you can sign as a free agent. So I was like, all right. Like next thing I knew, within 48 hours, I was on my way to Newark, New Jersey to sign with the Newark Bears to play minor league baseball. And so I did that for that first season, it was probably one of the most fun times I've had as a professional athlete, because I was doing something I loved, was having a ton of fun. I was young, single. I actually stayed at my agent's apartment in Manhattan on the Upper East Side, and then just commuted out to Newark. It's only like 20, 30 minutes outside the city. So like I was basically going to the ballpark every day at about 1, 2 o'clock, hit BP, work out, go to the game. The game starts at 7, get done at 10:30. And then a lot of the guys would go out in the city with me, because I had all the kind of the spots, because I'd played in New York. So I had a lot of connections. So we'd go out to a late dinner, go out to a bar or club or whatever, probably till about 2 a.m., 3 a.m., maybe sometimes a little bit later than that, go home, go to sleep, wake up at noon, and then do it all over again, like every single day. Like that's the minor league life. And I loved it. It was a blast. So I'm doing this schedule. I'm living in the Upper East Side. My agent would come and go because it was his apartment. And I'll never forget, one morning I was sitting there and I'm sleeping. It's like 10 a.m., 9 a.m. And my agent's knocking at the door, and he's like, wake up. I'm like, he knew I didn't wake up till noon. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, come here. He goes, you probably got to watch this. So it was over 9/11. It was September 11th. So I was living on the Upper East Side. He wakes me up. I'm kind of groggy. We watched the second plane hit the towers live, but it was crazy. So I was there over 9/11, went down to the World Trade Center the day after to try to help, give blood, whatever I could. And they were turning people away, but it was just kind of a crazy situation that just kind of, was part of this crazy journey. So anyway, I finished out that season. And I actually had one workout that I got the Washington football team that we're calling now. They called me they needed a quarterback. And this was during baseball. I was playing baseball having the time of my life. This was in August. So this was before 9/11. I went down to their camp. Brian Schottenheimer, Marty Schottenheimer was the head coach. Brian Schottenheimer his son was the quarterback coach. I went and threw for them because they want to see what kind of shape you are. I threw probably 15 passes. And they were like, yep, we've seen enough. Let's go make something happen. And I was like, all right. So we go inside, and we're getting I'm in this room, like this kind of holding area, waiting for to drive back to New Jersey or sign or whatever is going to happen. I'm talking to my agent, and I was like, can you get them to give me any signing bonus? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, they just want to give you the minimum salary, which at the time was probably 600,000, something like that. It was a lot of money, but there was no guarantee, and it was during camp. So I would technically I'd have to make the team to get the money.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I didn't want to give up baseball just yet. So it was probably one of those crucial moments that maybe I would have played longer in the NFL if I had chosen differently, because I still hadn't missed a year of NFL yet. I was still like, I just played for the Falcons. It was still my first off season. So they just wanted a healthy body. They were like, okay. And Jeff George was the starter. His elbow issues. So I'm talking to my agent on the phone. I'm like, hey, can you get him to give me something, 50 grand, something to make it worth my while, where if I give up baseball, I can get some cash in my pocket. And he was like, no, they really don't want to budge on that. And I was like, do you think they'll change their mind? He's like, maybe. He's like, if you make them wait. It's like, all right, well, let's wait. So literally within like 6 hours, Tony Banks, who was another quarterback, same class as mine, who was another starter, got cut from whatever team he was on. And he said, I'll sign on the dotted line. Let's go. So they signed Tony Banks over me while I was waiting for potentially 50 grand, which was, inconsequential in the bigger picture. But I'll never forget that night I'm watching SportsCenter, and they said, I remember hearing this and thinking, uh-oh, like the anchor came on and said, Danny Kanell has chosen baseball. And I was like, wait a second, that's not really, but it kind of made it look like I was over football and kind of done.
Mm-hmm.
And once that message gets out in the NFL, that's problematic because they want to see guys who are, sold out on football. So then that kind of closed the door for a little bit on football, because teams kind of wrote me off, said, how bad does he want it? Which was true. And so after I played minor league baseball for that year, I hit like 250. I had a home run. I had a couple triples. Like I did okay, but I wasn't going to get to the bigs. And I kind of knew that quickly, which is probably better because you see a guy like Tebow who still thinks he can get there and he's 3 or 4 years into it. Yeah. I knew right away. I was like, probably not going to do this. And I was making $1,200 a month. So then I was like, all right, well, I want to go, I want to try to get back in the NFL. Sending out tapes, letters to every team. I get no response. Then I get a call from a friend of mine who worked at NBC Sports that I knew from my time in the Giants. He said, hey, the New York Dragons have an opening at quarterback. It's the arena team. So I said, all right, what can you pay me? They actually paid pretty good money at the time. And, he's like, you can be in the New York area. And I felt like if I wanted to get back in the NFL, I had to show them I was willing to do whatever it took.
Yeah.
So I went, signed with the New York Dragons, played for them for a year, played okay, not great. But then finally it did open up another door with the Denver Broncos. And I played 2 more years in Denver, backing up Jake Plummer, and squeezed out 2 more years in the NFL. But that was probably the hardest cut that I've ever dealt with, was when I was cut my last year with the Broncos, because I kind of could see the writing on the wall coming and I didn't think it was fair. I was a much better professional because I was 30. I was mature. I had just gotten married. I knew what it took. I was dedicated. I was a good backup. I put in extra hours, and they cut me because of a salary cap casualty. Basically, I would have made $750 that year, and they were going to pay a rookie $250. So they saved $500,000 against the cap. I got cut, and then that was it. Like I remember when I got cut, I told my wife, we were newlyweds. She had just moved to Denver like 5 months before. I said, I'm not ever going to play again. And she was like, no, another team will give you an opportunity. I was like, no, I don't think so. And I got a bunch of workouts, got up but no team would pull the trigger on me. They wouldn't give me that, signing the dotted line, because there's a lot of politics that go into it later. Your contracts are guaranteed if you make the team, and salary cap reasons. And, I hadn't played that great. And it was kind of like, I was getting old. Like people had said, all right, he's a project. He's done. We've seen what he can do. Let's try to take a flyer to younger guys as opposed to him. And that was it. That was the last time I played in the NFL.
And you've talked to me about this before, that if you had to go back and do it all over again, you might do things a little bit differently.
There's 2 things I always wonder. There's 2 things I always wonder, because I absolutely would have done a lot of things differently. If I had because I do think, like, God gave me a gift to throw the football, right? And it presented a ton of opportunity, but it wasn't my first passion. I didn't love it. I loved what it brought to me. It gave me money. It gave me a lot of financial security for a time being. And it was fun. It's fun being famous. It's fun being the quarterback. But behind that, it takes a lot of work. And I was getting by on a lot of just natural ability and some smarts. but I wasn't invested the way you need to be a quarterback in the NFL. I was, I was never late. Like, it wasn't like I was a knucklehead. But like, if you had to be there at 8:30, I'd get there at 8:20. Make sure I wasn't late. Not like my rookie year, even when I was my second year, when I was the starter on the New York Giants, same mindset. It had worked at Florida State where we put up big numbers. I kind of same attitude. I'm going to be there when I'm supposed to be there. It worked my first year starting with the Giants. We went to the playoffs. I had success. They gave me a new contract. So they gave me a new contract my third year in the NFL, and I'm still, practice starts at 8:30. I'm getting there at 8:15. Hey, I'm not going to be late. I'll get a quick coffee and go into meetings. And then as soon as we're done every day at 5, see you later. Hey, I'm done with work. Like, practice is over. I showered. I get my lift in. I'm out. And I'd be one of the first few guys to leave the building every day. And that's just not what it takes. Even as a backup quarterback, I needed to be there at 7 a.m. if it starts at 8:30 to watch extra film, to discuss things with the coordinator. I needed to stay after to throw extra passes or to get a little extra stretching in or to get some extra work with a receiver that may need it or extra snaps with a center. And I just didn't understand that's what it took. And that's what it takes to really stand out from your coaches. So like when it was time, when I struggled my third year with the Giants, I think I made it really easy on them to say, yeah, let's cut bait. It's early, but let's cut bait, because they didn't see somebody with this intense desire to be great or even to be good. I gave them kind of the minimum. And I regret that from a standpoint of, man, I think I could have been better if I had invested more of me. But it's hard to do that when you don't really love what you're doing. And it's crazy because I think people hear that and like, well, it's a professional sport. Isn't it fun? And yeah, it's fun, but it takes a lot of work. And like, I was having probably too much fun, to be honest with you, because I enjoyed the lifestyle, living near New York, and I was going out. And one of the reasons I was getting there at 8:15, not 7, is because I was probably tired because I went out the night before, just enjoyed life and didn't make some of those sacrifices that you have to make. Like talking about golf and making sacrifices with my kids. In the off season, I would go into the workout facility, and they'd usually have workouts set up. And this is in March, April, May, like OTAs or voluntary workouts. I would get my workout in. I would throw a few balls, and then I was on the golf course every day by noon. Like, and this is all throughout my off season where, you ask the greats like Tom Brady, Drew Brees, they're going in, getting their workouts, throwing some, then they're going back in. They're probably not grinding until 6 at night, but in the offseason, they're probably putting in a pretty solid day till at least 2 or 3 o'clock and occasionally playing golf. I just had my priorities out.
What are they doing to like get that edge that you're talking about?
I think, there's a lot of self-drive that everybody always, Tom Brady's chip on his shoulder is well documented. But I do think he tricks himself into thinking, man, and he maybe even gets mad, like on a daily basis. Like, hey, they say I'm too old. Everyone's saying I'm 43. I can't do it. I think he's telling himself that every morning when he wakes up. And it says, well, then this is what I got to do to get there. I think they're playing mental mind games. Some guys will do it. The sad thing, I do see a lot of guys do it until they get that big contract. And then once they get paid, they kind of take the foot off the gas, and then they feel like they've made it, that's probably the way I would best describe me. Like I got there, was a starter, kind of achieved what I wanted to, but I just didn't have that extra passion to really say, all right, I want to be one of the greats. I want to play for 20 years. You know what I mean? Like, I think some guys have that intense desire.
Do you think that it would have been like that if you played baseball because you liked it more? Or do you think it was just a function of your age and the lack of?
It might have been a function of my age and maturity, work ethic. That it's funny because I work way harder the older I've gotten, but I think I learned my lessons. Like I think I learned, man, I had something really special and I lost it because I was dumb. Like, and I could have made more sacrifices and been better. But I do also, like, I think about baseball. I think I was more gifted as a baseball player than a football player. Like my personality, my skill set, like I'm not fast. I'm not the most athletic guy. That's why I looked at when I would walk into an NFL locker room, I would have that mentality of, man, do I belong here? Like I can't believe I'm playing. I'm running away from guys that look like that. And I'm throwing to guys that look like that. I'm handing off to guys that, run 4.4s. and I'm just a guy. But when I went into a baseball locker room, I felt like, man, I can hit any pitcher I face. I can strike out any batter I face. Like I felt more confident. And I think that, like, but I also did love the game more. Like I just loved it more. But I don't know if that, who knows? Like I was actually talking to Courtney, my wife, about this not too long ago. She's like, did you work that much harder when you played minor league baseball? And I was like, she probably brings up a good point. I was still like, you heard my schedule before. It wasn't like I was going into the ballpark at 10 a.m. when some guys do and some guys did. I was kind of in that routine of I'll get in my work, but I'm not necessarily going to do the extra work. And that, like, it was a lesson that I didn't learn because when I mentioned getting cut by the Broncos, that was a time in my career where I was getting there at 7 a.m. if we started at 9, and I was staying till 6 at night working with Jake Plummer, the starter. And that's why it cut the deepest, because I felt like, man, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and now I'm going to get cut. And that like stung deep, but it also instilled in me this lesson that, hey, don't be lazy. Like, don't take things for granted. Work hard. If you've got something good, fight to keep it, work at it so that you don't, have to give it up.
So you mentioned the sentiment, about wishing maybe you'd put more time in and working harder. Do you think that that's something, because I know that the vast majority of NFL players, their careers all end like yours, right? The very few of them, the John Elways, walk off with the trophy in the air on their own terms. Like, how prevalent do you think that thought process is amongst fellow players, former players who probably wouldn't be as brave as you to say that, on a TV setting or whatever? Like, is that something you find in commiserating with other players? Like, man, I didn't give it my all, even though you never messed up, or you, like you said, missed a meeting or
right
trouble.
I think some would be willing to admit it, but I mean, different guys don't make it for different reasons. Cause I played with a lot of guys. I mean, you play 7 years, you go through 7 training camps, really 8, cause I got cut in the last one. You see guys that sold out everything to make it to the NFL. And I'm talking, they don't come from much. They're willing to do whatever it takes, and they're working hard. They would be there for sure early, for sure after, putting in that extra work, but they just weren't good enough. I saw a lot of guys like that just couldn't quite cut it at the upper echelon. Sadly, a lot of guys, not a lot, but that's one thing. Guys just aren't good enough, and they probably admit that later. A lot of guys, I do think, come up with the excuse of, well, I got screwed over. I early on, when I was probably my first year or two out of the league, there was some of that. When I got cut by the Giants, there was some of that. Well, I didn't have a good offensive line. They didn't protect me. That, like, there's definitely some finger pointing that goes on with a lot of guys. And I tell you what, my self-realization that it was more my fault, I think, helps me get over my career and the lack of success that I had. And I think 7 years is a pretty good success, but I feel like I could have had more.
Sure.
I think a lot of guys have a really bitter taste in their mouth towards the NFL, towards the way they were treated, towards, it's a harsh environment, and it's cutthroat, and the team will chew you up and spit you out. They do. They treat you like pieces of meat, unless you're the top, unless you're a Hall of Famer, if you're a Tom Brady, a Drew Brees. And even look at the way those guys are treated. Even Tom Brady, how do you think he feels towards the Patriots?
Right.
They're going to use you and squeeze what they can out of you, and then they're just going to throw you aside. And that can be a really tough feeling to get over. I think that's why a lot of guys, sue the NFL with the CTE issues that come up. I think it's why a lot of guys struggle mentally after they're done playing. It's just a really tough transition. And if you've given your whole life to get this goal, and then all of a sudden, even if you retire on your own, it's hard. Like, it's hard for Peyton Manning. I promise you, it's hard for him to not go to the locker room and go to work every day. It's hard for John Elway, who found another niche by being being involved in the team as a front office member. But it's challenging. And when it doesn't go the way you want it to, it can really make you bitter towards a lot of things. And I see a lot of bitterness in a lot of former professional athletes across all sports, not just in the NFL.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are those are good points. And I wanted to tie that into, can you talk to me a little bit more about the business of the NFL? And, I was certified as an agent for some time and got to see, dabble a little bit in that. And it certainly, my intentions were, you read all these stories about players being taken advantage of and various different things. And, my hope was that, I could sort of, change that or be the countercurrent to that. But I feel like, ultimately the system and the culture is just, it's almost doomed in that sense. So.
Yeah, it's a seedy business. I mean, I think I even talked to you about this, just said, hey, just so you're getting into, like, it's shady, right? There's a lot of poaching that goes on between agents. Players are hard to trust. Sometimes it's hard getting your fees to recoup them from players. Sometimes they just don't understand how it works. I tell you, like, I had a really fortunate experience with agents because I was a top, projected quarterback coming out. So I actually met with probably the top 5 agents at the time. I met with Tom Condon, who was I think he was at IMG at the time. He's one of the most, well-respected agents that's out there. I met with Lee Steinberg, who was the quarterback guy at the time. And then he's made an unbelievable resurgence,
Right,
because he had some alcohol issues and addiction issues, and he kind of was like washed up. And then he's made a really impressive comeback, which is cool from him. I met with him. I met with Jimmy Sexton and Kyle Rote, who were, Jimmy Sexton obviously now is one of the biggest college football agents there is. And then I met with Marvin Demoff. And Marvin Demoff was my agent who I ended up going with. They all had a sales pitch that they had before you. Here's what we can give to you. Here's what we can provide for you. But I really liked Marvin's mentality was, I can't, because if an agent tells you I can get you drafted higher,
right.
they're lying. Like, they just can't. Like, you can try to sell a team on a guy, and you can try to get him a workout, and getting a player a workout sometimes is an achievement.
Yeah.
But there's nothing an agent can say that's going to get you drafted higher. It's just impossible. You have to have either done it or showed something that they're going to do it. And Marvin was like, I'm not going to be able to get you drafted. And he was very honest, like almost blunt. He's like, I'm not going to be able to get you drafted any higher. He's like, but I'm going to help you manage your career. He's like, I'm not just going to be your agent. I'm going to help you. And he's like, and he really did. I mean, it was very, and by the way, he also was Dan Marino's agent, who was my childhood hero. And like, Dan Marino gave me a recommendation. So like, that was done for me. Like, it was a done deal once he said that. And he was awesome as an agent. Like, he had a lot of contacts, which were really helpful. He had good relationships with general managers who respected him, which is really valuable. I think that you can have that dialogue. And he did get me paid earlier than I had to be paid. Like, I came in the same class as Bobby Hoying, who went to Ohio State, and he was drafted in the 3rd round, I believe. And I was in the 4th round. He was drafted by the Eagles. I was drafted by the Giants. And we had kind of similar career paths, both young quarterbacks. We weren't first rounders, but we were both having success, him with the Eagles, me with the Giants. I would say we played probably similar. We made the playoffs, which was different, a little bit better, but he was still playing pretty good and looked like he could be a potential option for them. So Marvin Demoff came to me and said, hey, the Giants want to do something. They want to rework your deal, because I was the starter.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, all right. He's like, all right, here are your options. He's like, you could play out another year, your 3rd year, and you could try to get more money. He's like, but you really don't have the financial security that they could offer if you rework a deal and maybe take a little bit of a lesser deal, for the long term. And I was like, all right. And like, I was jumping at the chance to have financial security. So I said, that makes sense. Do you think the Giants will do it? He said, yeah. So he got me like a fair deal. And then I looked at Bobby Hoying. He couldn't get a new deal, ended up playing his 3rd year. So we both played 3rd years. I get cut, but at least I had that financial security. He never ended up amounting to much as a starting quarterback for the Eagles. So he never got the financial security that I did. Like, and I thought that was one little instance where Marvin gave me like good advice, got me a good workable deal, gave me a good recommendation, and was like, all right, this was smart. Like, felt like a smart move. And he was very upfront. Like, he told me it was a 3-year deal, but he was like, this is really a 2-year deal. That's really, not that, we could rework it in 2 years, but he was like very upfront with the detail. He's a very brilliant mind, the way he thinks, with the numbers. The unfortunate part about it was later in my career, we didn't have a falling out, but I felt like I needed an agent who was going to be calling teams to get me the workout I was talking about. And Marvin was at a point in his career where he was used to representing Marino, Elway, all these other first round talents, guys where the teams are calling him saying, hey, like the Giants called him, can we get a deal done? I needed somebody who was going to be pounding the phone line saying, hey, Kanell's got another year left in him. And I just don't. And so I ended up actually not going with an agent later in my career because I just didn't see any value in it. I was picking up the phone. I was sending out letters. I was trying to set my own workouts for myself. And it actually got me back with the Broncos. So it did help. And I didn't feel like I needed an agent because I was just going to make league minimum. There's nothing to negotiate. I just wanted a chance. So that's what I got. And so, but I think more players can do it without an agent than people think. Agents have a little bit of a racket when you look at the game, the way it's played, because a lot of it's just slotted. And if you have a good attorney or somebody you trust, which is hard to find, you can probably do a lot of it yourself where the agent doesn't make that much of a difference.
Well, I mean, especially for the college guys, right? I mean, to me, the agent's the piggy bank to pay for the training and basically bridge the gap financially between pro day.
They loan you. Yeah, they give you a front, which is a lot. That's how an agent gets. That's how, unfortunately, you learn this because that's how they poach a lot of players too.
Right.
Hey, I'll give you an advance. Here's 50 grand in your account. I'll also set up these. But what a lot of players don't understand, whether they make the team or not, they're going to get a bill for that. So sometimes you get an agent who has a player that's maybe a draftable pick, maybe he thinks he's going to be a third round pick. He doesn't get picked till the 7th, and he gets a $25,000 signing bonus. But the agent lent him 50 grand, and set up all these workouts. So the player gets his 25 grand, of which there are taxes taken out. So now he's down to like 15 grand. And then he's barely making the roster. And if he doesn't make the roster, all of a sudden he's got a bill from his agent that said, oh, you owe me 20 grand for this workout nutrition setup that I had at X Training Performance Institute that you have to pay me. So it's a really dicey, seedy, arrangement that a lot of agents do get burned by, but a lot of players get burned by as well. So it's like this really kind of cutthroat, shady arrangement that takes place. And it's like, it can be it's like not a lot of people know about that side of the business that you became familiar with.
Right.
And it's just, it's shady, and it's unfortunate because a lot of people end up losing, money. They end up losing reputations. It's sad. It's a sad reality of that portion of the business.
Yeah, sure. And then, the rookie deals, you're basically slotting into the deals predetermined
Exactly.
by anyway. So there's really not a whole lot to negotiate there. Right. So I'd like to, take me back to, after the Broncos, the career is done, walk me through what that sort of journey is like. And you're trying to figure out, you're 30 years old at that time.
Yep.
Obviously.
So 30 years old, and then you've got like the rest of your life to do what? And that was the question I was asking myself. I had no idea. I was pre-med at Florida State because when I was younger, I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And then kind of these opportunities got in the way. And I actually did go meet with the head of the medical school at Nova Southeastern. I thought about going back to med school. That was an option. I looked into that. I looked at franchises. I looked at McDonald's franchises. I looked at Einstein franchises. I was basically looking at all these different opportunities, but it took me a while to get to that point. So I would say for 2 years after I was cut from the Broncos, I was in this purgatory, this no man's land of I'm still in shape. I had just played for the Broncos. I'm getting workouts. I probably got 5 or 6 workouts. I went to Carolina. I went to Indy to possibly be Peyton's backup. I was dying for that job. I was like, man, sign me up for that one. That's like a ticket. That's like a golden ticket. It's like, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You'd be Peyton's backup. You're set. He never got hurt and he's awesome. And you just help him and collect paychecks. I worked out for a bunch of these different teams. Baltimore. I thought Baltimore was going to sign me with the Ravens. But I'm not getting signed. So I'm basically working out hoping to get that other shot. And so that goes on for a whole, and that's like that first off season. I got cut in September. So like that first season, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm probably going to get, even though remember I told my wife, I'm like, I'm not going to get another chance. In the back of my mind, I'm like, I really want another chance. So I'm getting some of these workouts. So that season goes by, and it's kind of like it was a wasted year because I'm sitting there just working out, but you know, it's like a respite. Like I'm kind of getting healthy. So I do that for another season because another off season goes by. I had more workouts and I just wouldn't get signed. I'd get there and they'd be like, man, you look good. We'll get back to you if somebody gets hurt, but you still look like you can play. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm only 31, you know, and you kind of talk yourself into it.
Yeah.
So at the time I'm in this schedule of I'm working out hard. I was in really good shape, throwing, and then I would go play golf. Like this is when I was kind of starting to play a little bit more golf because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I felt like I had one foot in the NFL door, like, man, I don't want to give this up yet. And I didn't know what to do. So I was like, I'll work out, stay in shape, and I'll play golf. I love playing golf. So as I'm playing golf, I'm playing at Coral Ridge where you play, where we used to play. And I'm playing with a group of guys. And one of the guys that I'm playing with, I become friendly with, and he's talking to me about business ideas. And I would do this with everybody. Like, hey, Jay Gunther is, a car dealer. I'd be like, hey, what's it like being owning car dealerships? And so I'd kind of like, man, maybe I should think about that. So I had all these different, irons in the fire, just kind of listening to a lot of different people and kind of deciding. It was incredibly frustrating because I didn't know what to do. So this one gentleman, Chris O'Gorman, who's a friend of ours, plays at the club, he had been on Wall Street and he had talked to me for a while. And he's like, man, I really think you could be good in this industry. And I was like, doing what? Like, I'm not an analyst. I'm not a stock picker. I'm like, what do you want me to do? And he's like, I think you could be somebody that helps bring money to the table, like develop relationships. And I was like, all right, let me think about that. So he had planted this seed in my mind, and I was like, that's interesting. And I was like, well, what would I do? He's like, you help forge relationships with my company or our proposed company. And, we get people to give us money, and then you cultivate those relationships, you maintain those relationships, and I manage the money and kind of decide where it goes. And it was going to be sort of a hedge fund approach where we would have a fund of funds, and he would position all the money, and I would basically help raise money. So again, I was like, well, what do I do? He's like, you get us in the door. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you played in the NFL. He's like, your name helps. He's like, everybody wants to meet a former NFL quarterback. He's like, we can golf with them. We can entertain them. You can watch football with them and all these different, he's like, but he was basically like stirring up this, well, here's what you could do. I was like, well, that sounds kind of fun. I'm playing golf anyway, like every day. I love to play golf. I'm a pretty good talker. Like I'm pretty friendly. I can make friends pretty easy. So I was like, all right. So I decided to do it. So we started an investment management company. It was called Look Capital, the L-O-O-K, the K was for Kanell. And so we started this idea. And this was probably in mid 2006, maybe 2007. Cause I was cut in 05. So it's like probably 2007. And so it's going, and we're having some pretty good, not anywhere major success, but we're getting a couple like nibbles here, and we're getting a little bit, our idea was to go after the high net worth clients or high net institutions, even like was trying to reach out to different, funds and I can't, it's just totally
hedge funds.
my mind now. Yeah. But also, what do they call it at colleges where they have, where Stanford has their endowments? We were trying to reach out to, I totally mind like different endowments, try to manage some of their money, and basically have like $1 million minimum investment. Like we were going after high net worth individuals or institutions. So we're getting like some of this, we're plugging away. And I found out pretty quickly that I was horrible at asking for money. I don't like it when people ask me for money, and I didn't like asking people for them for money. So I would be great at like, hey, I like this person likes me, Danny Kanell. They want to play golf with me, but it was incredibly hard for me to say, all right, it's time to cut bait. Like, let's go. Like it's time to sign on the dotted line. And then you find out that people are funny with their money. Like, and I understand because I've been on the other side of the ask where we'd have people on the golf course. Yep. You guys make sense. I'm willing to give you guys a try. And then you have to track them down and get them to actually sign on the dotted line, and they don't call back. they're out of the country for a week, and it's just impossible. And it was really frustrating. And it's not my personality to be that aggressive, go after, I'm going to get this, I'm going to go close this deal. It's just not. And then, so that was like, I was coming to that realization. I wasn't like, the golf was fun, but I wasn't having fun there. And then, oh, by the way, like we're in the like right pre-Great Recession, so the market's tanking, people are losing money. And then Bernie Madoff happens and people are not real super pumped about giving their money to some startup investment management company where there's no history. Like people wanted to really stick with JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs. Like they wanted to go with the reputable brands where they knew they weren't going to get duped. And it was just like, so the timing kind of forced our hand, and we looked around, we're like, we probably gave this our best shot. It's just not working. And it was a fun experience, but it just wasn't for me. So one of the things that happened was one of our silent partners in Look, and one of the initials in there was also a producer in television, in sports television. So he was a producer for ESPN and NFL Network, and we would golf with him. And he actually was talking to me one day, and he said, "Hey," he said, "I think you could, he said, I think you'd be good at broadcast." And I was like, I really don't want to do it, because I did not like broadcasters. Like I don't like media members. I didn't like radio people because they criticize you, right? Like it's an awkward relationship that unfolds between players and media. Like it's, you respect them. I respected them, but I just didn't want to be a part of them because I didn't like that. But he's like, no, I think you should give it a try. And so I was like, all right, what do you, and he actually came with me. He's like, I have an opportunity. I was like, all right, what is it? He's like, they have an NFL Europe game. NFL Europe was going on. He said, would you want to call it and be the analyst? And I was like, sure. I was like, I'll give it a try. Like, why not? And I figured it was Barcelona versus the Rhine Fire. Barcelona Dragons versus the Rhine Fire. It was in Barcelona. So I'm thinking, worst case, I get a free trip to Barcelona, right? Like, this is going to be incredible. So he's like, all right, done. He's like, I'll have our travel secretary reach out to you tomorrow. He's like, I think you'll be great. He's like, we'll touch base again before the game, give you a few tips, whatever. So I called the travel lady the next day, and I had looked up flights. I'm looking at it. I had looked up, I'm flying into Barcelona. Do I need to go from Miami to New York or whatever? And so she's like, when do you want to leave? And I was like, all right, and so I'm setting up. I'm like, I would prefer to fly from Miami as opposed to having to go to New York. And she's like, you can fly from Fort Lauderdale or Palm Beach anywhere. She's like, and I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, you're only coming to New Jersey. I said, what? And she said, he didn't tell you? And I said, no. I said, what? And she said, we're doing this one remote. She's like, we're saving costs so the broadcast team doesn't go to Barcelona. You do it from a closet in New Jersey at NFL Films. And so I was like, all right. So I missed out on the trip to Barcelona, but in like this weird roundabout way, it was where I started my broadcasting career. It literally was, because I did the game, and it was like, and I did it actually. Charles Davis, who's incredible broadcaster, was with Fox. Now he's with me at CBS, does the NFL coverage. He was my play-by-play, so he was kind of experimenting in analyst versus play-by-play, and so they paired us together. So I got to pick his ear the whole time about the industry and what it was like. I worked with him, called the game. When I got home, there was a little write-up in the Sun Sentinel, in the local paper, and it said, hey, Danny Kanell called this game. And it was like, I think it might have been the Miami Herald, but it was like he did a pretty good job, whatever it was. So I was like, all right. So then from that article, I got a call from 560 QAM, the local radio station who covered the Miami Dolphins. And they said, are you interested in broadcasting? So that kind of just was a snowball effect. And then I started doing some radio at QAM, and I really enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. And I think it helped that I was 2 or 3 years removed from the NFL, because the bitterness that I talked about earlier was kind of gone. It was easier for me to criticize guys. I just felt more comfortable. And then once I went with QAM, I was doing Dolphins pregame shows, and, I'd be at the post-game show, like at the Hooters and Sawgrass, like with a bunch of people, like taking phone calls after the game. I really liked it. And then it lit a competitive spark in me. I was like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it good. And I want to be one of the best. And so that kind of set off this kind of work ethic that, all right, I'm going to throw myself into this full time. Because a lot of broadcasters have other jobs that they do, so they'll be, attorneys. Rod Gilmore for ESPN is an attorney. Some guys have real estate companies. Some guys have other interests that they have. I didn't have anything, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was like, I want to do this. And I looked at Mike Golick. I looked at Lee Corso. I looked at other guys who were making a living and a good living just doing this. So I was like, this is what I want to do. And then got the opportunity to go to New York or to Connecticut and move to ESPN. So that's kind of where the broadcasting ball got rolling in that direction.
Yeah, that's great. And you were one of the first guys that I followed on Twitter that I noticed established this social media presence, maybe even ahead a lot of your colleagues. And I saw, I was just looking yesterday. I mean, you had 400,000 followers like 10 years ago. So I'm just kind of curious, or whatever it was, 7 or 8. I'm curious, like, obviously the Twitter sphere is like the Wild West in a lot of ways. And can you just touch on that a little bit? And
so I'm really down on Twitter lately. I don't know if it's the pandemic. It seems like it's an all-time toxic level. And I just think politically we're so divided, and people are angry. And I've always noticed, and it's always been there, right? there've been trolls. They get upset about your football take. But it used to be like I could interact with people on Twitter and have fun with it, because I like to talk a lot of trash and I'm very sarcastic. And people would be able to figure that out, and you could have a back and forth and maybe win them over, which I enjoyed. Or, if it was based off a sports take, people would be like, well, how could you say, I'd get in with Florida State fans like, hey, I don't think they're going to be that good this year. And I get Florida State fans livid with me, and I'd be like, well, this is why I don't think that. And then you kind of talk to them and some reason would come about. You'd say, hey, I don't think, oh my goodness, Tebow. I don't know if you remember Tebow. That was really on Facebook. That unfolded because I did not see it with Tim Tebow that he was going to be an NFL quarterback. And a lot of like friends of ours that were Gator fans were livid, like they were angry, like thought I was a jerk and like I was this bad person. I was like, I promise I don't have anything against him. I just don't think he's going to be that good. And like, but I would explain it, and then you could kind of walk away and feel like, okay, nobody hates each other. I feel like I've lost that on Twitter. Like it's every take is infused with politics, because even now, like, should they play college football? If you say yes, it's, well, don't you care about the players' lives? There's just a lot. Race is infused in almost everything. I said something about Dwayne Haskins just 2 weeks ago that I thought Alex Smith would pick up the playbook faster than Dwayne Haskins. Alex Smith is 36 years old. He's played, 15 years in the NFL. Dwayne Haskins has 1 year. And I get into that with this Washington blogger who's accusing me of being racist and like using white privilege because I said that. I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, that has nothing to do with it. And I was trying to explain to him, and he did not believe. He's just like, no, this is your subconscious white privilege showing through that you won't acknowledge that. And it was incredibly frustrating. And that, unfortunately, is what a lot of conversations on Twitter have delved into. But like early to what you were saying, like Twitter was a great avenue for me to build a base and build a following and build sort of a brand. And ESPN absolutely helped me because I noticed exponential growth. ESPN is a brand leader, clearly. They're one of the most recognized brands in the world. And it helped me give me a brand. And part of that was gaining a following on Twitter, which I did cultivate by interacting with a lot of people, but it also came with giving some maybe controversial views that weren't mainstream. And at the time, you could give controversial views and people would see it just as that, maybe, contrarian. Now you get pegged as some crazy person. Like you get pegged either as your far right or your far left or whatever political sphere you're in, and then you just get written off. You can't even say something without a bunch of assumptions being made. So I've really just I've taken a step back a little bit from Twitter and just posting videos that I do with work. Because every time I try to give some sort of take, it develops into, oh, well, you must be a Trump lover, or you must be, you hate Trump. Like, it's crazy. Like I have people from all angles assume I'm either far right or far left based on a sports take. And it's too toxic. It's crazy.
It's interesting. Just in our conversations in the past, I've never really seen you as an edgy or controversial guy at all.
Right. I'm not.
And I just don't see that. But interestingly enough, I really enjoyed, and I'm a psychology guy, seeing your at least initial emergence on Twitter with this sort of what seemed to be very fun-loving anti-SEC slang
Right.
things. And it didn't seem, mean-spirited at all, but it was always fun kind of poking the bear and how much that would rile people up,
Oh.
pro or against. I would just find fascinating experiment in psychology of social media.
And it was fun, and it still can be, but people lost sight of the fun nature of it. Like, and I never set out to create, like, and it was never a pre-planned, oh, let's attack the SEC.
Right.
I just kind of started noticing, and Twitter is a drug. Like, you start noticing, okay, I'm getting more comments on this. I'm getting more likes. I'm getting more retweets. There's more interaction. So that can be a drug. So, if you say, oh, well, USC is going to win the Pac-12, nobody cares. If you say, hey, Georgia is going to beat Bama this year in the SEC, or, even if you say that, like, Alabama's riled, they're going to all be peppering you with questions. God forbid if you say the SEC is going to miss the playoff, then you've got 14 fan bases that are pissed off and all coming at you. And I would say I kind of describe my thought process, my kind of like what I like to try to do is I do enjoy playing devil's advocate, which, all right, let's look at a different angle from this, because I cannot stand groupthink. And there absolutely was a groupthink in college football that the SEC is best. And if you say things over and over enough, they become truth. Like, right, if you say someone's a racist and everybody just says it for, a year, it becomes truth, whether you like it or not. And with the SEC, I felt like people were in lazy people in sports media would just say, oh, the SEC is head and shoulders everybody else. And I'd be like, wait a second, are they really head and shoulders above everybody else? And then it turned into, well, maybe they're overrated, which is a very loaded term. And when you say the SEC is overrated, it can mean a lot of different things, right? So that's kind of where it started, because I would look at it and I would watch and say, all right, well, they're going to let LSU and Alabama have a rematch. Oklahoma State's a team that was really good. They lost one game, same as Alabama had. But they lost it after there was a horrible tragedy of a plane wreck, and they lost to a bad Iowa State team. But why do they have one loss and they win their conference? Bama has one loss, didn't win their why do they get to play again? And that was kind of the basis of where this anti-SEC thing, because I was like, that's not fair. Like, that doesn't make a ton of sense. And then, it just, so it was a devil's advocate sort of view. But again, I have a lot of sarcasm. And once you start coming at me, I'm going to come back at you. I'm not just going to take it. And so I would give it back to people. And then, and it definitely hurt my career at the end of ESPN. And even currently, I think, because I have no problem pumping up the SEC. Like last year, LSU, I said Joe Burrow is going to win the Heisman pretty early in the season. I was like, LSU is one of the greatest teams we've ever seen in the history of college football. Like, I have no problem giving the SEC praise. But I think that anti-SEC Danny Kanell has become a brand to a point where it probably hurts me a lot in jobs. Like, when I went to CBS, they did not want me on the CBS halftime show because they were worried about the brass at the SEC saying he's too anti-SEC. And that bothers me, because I think that's not an accurate assessment of who I am. Every analyst gets accused of being a homer. Kirk Herbstreit, oh, he's in the can for Ohio State, or David Pollock's in the can for Georgia. None of us are, but because all of us, we love our school. Like, I love Florida State. I will cheer for them. I will hope they win. I will do everything I can to try to make sure that happens. But I have zero problem saying they suck, or they need to play better, or they need to fire a coach, or they need to do this, or they're just not that good. And that's what we're supposed to do. And if the SEC is good, I have no problem saying they're good. But if they're not, I'm going to tell people they're not. If I think Bama's not as good as everybody else, I'm going to tell people that. And that's frustrating to me because I think it's been pegged as this anti-SEC. So anything I say now gets put in this box. And I think it's hurt my career somewhat in the last few years.
Interesting. So it kind of goes against the common wisdom that, any publicity is good publicity, right? So in this case,
it can, but yeah, I think from that standpoint, but it's still, at least you have a brand. Like if you're forgotten, and I try to tell I don't like it, but at least they know who Danny Kanell is, if that makes sense.
Nice guy.
Sound arrogant. I don't want it to sound arrogant, but I'd rather say, oh, Danny Kanell is the anti-SEC than who the heck is Danny Kanell?
Well, well, to your point, I don't think nice guy is much of a brand. Right.
Right. So. Exactly. It's not. I mean, that's been something I've really been soul searching, because I wish there was a place where you could just be you. And I feel like I try to be. I honestly do. On the radio, I feel like I try to be me. But you have to turn it on. You have to turn on some sort of switch where you give more energy, more whatever. But I do not want to be, I don't want to give names, but there are people that have had incredible amounts of success because they yell, they scream at each other. They take extreme contrarian like Skip Bayless. I don't want to be Skip Bayless. Yeah. Skip Bayless is just like, he trolls LeBron James, and everybody sees right through it. I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to take a hard right angle and say, because sports is infused with politics now. I don't want to go all over the deep end like a Clay Travis who has gone far to the right. I don't want to go far to the left like a lot of my colleagues have, and everything has got to be this leftist view. I find myself like a lot of people in the middle, but the middle is not a place in sports media or really media in general that has been a great place to make a career. So I'm kind of like in this soul searching, well, what do I do? I got to, do I have to move one way or another? But I don't want to sell out just to continue a career. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, I think that, to your point, I think social media is all about picking a side, right? There's no nuance. There's no gray. It seems like if you haven't chosen a side or one extreme and spoken loudly about it, then you're somehow a sellout or a cop-out or, so I completely see that point, and it's an unfortunate place to be. I don't know the foundation of that is. I think it's dualistic in nature. I mean, for years and years, for millennia, I've been talking about good versus evil and black versus white. And I think as human beings, we're definitely capable of both, right?
Right. And I think that's what you're doing. I think is something that I appreciate and I think could be a success, because I do think people want to just hear good conversation, just good content, like something that either enlightens or it entertains, but it's not aggravating. I think there's a space for that. And I think, Tim Ferriss, somebody you've you referenced as somebody you looked up to in the podcast space, does that. I think he has really interesting interviews. I told you I listened to a lot of Joe Rogan. I think he does a lot of interesting conversations, and he's always learning about new aspects. And how do I, enough to try to, all right, how do I do that in sports? How can I, and I'll try to, but I do have strong opinions as well. It's not like I'm afraid to take strong opinions, but just, again, everything has been politicized where it can't just be, that's where I try to just kind of get back to, all right, let me get strong sports opinions that don't have to be this loudmouth take, or, you don't have to just troll LeBron James to make a name for yourself. You can give genuine, but that's where it comes in the daily prep of finding, all right, what do I really believe? What are my convictions? So that you can go out there and people don't think you're faking it. Because I think people would see right through if you're faking it.
Right. Well, no, I personally am drawn to, like you said, hearing the other side of the story and the contrarian take. And we've spoken before how I enjoy Colin Cowherd when I do listen to him. And he's at least trying to take an original viewpoint. And later on, he'll go back and say, hey, here's where I was right and here's where I was wrong. And I appreciate that. At least give me a null hypothesis and say, I'm not saying this is true, but I'm saying people haven't really considered this point of view and this perspective. And those are the types of conversations that I enjoy the most. And my theory is, I think most of us out there, whether we consider ourselves blue or red, I think we have a lot more in common and agree on more than we think. If you filter out the 10% extremes on either side, I think we all just want to be able to go to work and provide for our families and be protected. And have a chance at living a normal life. And I think that we may have different ways to get there, but I think that social media has this sort of way of pushing the extremes and filtering out those of us who are trying to find that, the nuance and gray area of what's really happening that makes an issue before we decide, we're going to go on either extreme of it. So,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe we'll get there. Maybe this is just some sort of temporary time period where we're getting used to this world of interacting digitally more than ever. It's interesting to see from a business perspective how the dynamics of the world have changed. I wouldn't want to own an office building right now because of, people are doing more and more of this Zoom thing. As I'm sitting here, I'm probably only 3 or 4 miles from where you are in my office in Boca Raton. But I would like to hear, just going to jump back, between college and the NFL, what would you consider to be, highlight of your career, a moment that you hang on to and cherish more than anything?
I mean, clearly the highlight from Florida State was the choke at Doak. I mean, that's like every Florida State fan. And thank goodness I had it. We won the Orange Bowl. We beat Notre Dame. That was cool. But I didn't win a national championship. And that was really the bar at Florida State.
Yeah.
I wonder if I didn't have the choke at Doak, what people would say to me. But thankfully I have it. That's what every Florida State fan says, man, I remember that game. It was against Florida. We were down 31-3 with 10 minutes left. We came roaring back. We tied it up. It was crazy. It was the closest I've ever been to the zone. When you, especially in football. I felt in baseball at other times, but in football, that was one where I was almost unconscious. It was just everything was kind of happening and it was working and everybody was on the same page. So I would say that is absolutely the highlight from my career at Florida State. The NFL, probably a couple different ones. We clinched our division against the Washington football team. I'm still getting used to it. It's going to take a long time. I'm sure I'm going to slip up.
I would have gone with football club, but football team.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. Football club.
That's just the guy in me, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of like it. They should take on that. We clinched the division against them in 97. It was my first year starting. We were going to the playoffs, and it was just really cool. The crowd was insane. It felt like a college atmosphere because they're definitely different in the NFL. It's more sterile, but there was an excitement and energy that week after, leading up to the playoffs. It's just, you're getting a lot of media attention everywhere you go in New Jersey. Everybody's like, go Giants. It was really cool. And it was a successful season. It was my first time starting, and I'm overwhelmed with media requests and getting on, Inside the NFL show or, whatever kind of every, Fox pregame show. There were always interview requests, and it was overwhelming, but it was fun. It was a blur because it happened really fast. And it was this instant success going from rookie year, 4th round pick, man, I got to make the squad, to making it second year, I'm starting and going to the playoffs on top of that. It was just nuts. So that was pretty cool. I had some good games against the Arizona Cardinals, who were the bottom dwellers in the NFL at the time. But I would say that game probably resonated with me as one of my highlights. It was just a fun, cool game. That was a lot of fun.
I think we got maybe 10 more minutes, but
yeah.
in terms of football, how do you go from the one extreme of being down 31-3 in one game, and then the same game, same players, same place, turn it around to where you guys were literally interested from actually winning the game, if I recall?
So it was a little, if I could run, we would have had a first down and maybe had a long field goal, because I tried to, run it, which I never did. So I think this is a lesson that I've learned that I can apply to life. Courtney thinks I should write a book on it, kind of the art of the comeback or whatever it is, which has already been done. But for I almost got benched too, because we were down 28-3, I think, at half, and then we went down 31-3 in the third quarter. But we went in the locker room, and I remember I was getting booed from the Florida State fans. They were like, "You suck, get him out of there," whatever. We go in, and I remember Bobby Bowden was having a conversation with Mark Richt, and they were discussing, do we make the switch? Do we go to Thad Busby, who was my backup? And I remember Mark Richt told me this after the fact, but I knew what they were doing. I was like, oh. And Mark Richt came up to me. He's like, we're going to give you one more series. We're going to see how it goes. He's like, but you need to play better. And so we kind of played a little bit better, but in my mind, it was, and the message kind of to my teammates was, we can't get embarrassed. We can't get embarrassed out here on our home turf. So I was like, let's just do what we can do, and it's one play at a time. And it sounds so cliche, but really that was all we could do, because you can't throw a touchdown that's worth 28 points. You gotta, so it was just make it respectable. It was just go out there. Let's try to execute. Let's not get embarrassed. And it was one good play, and you try to add them together, and hopefully it comes up to a bunch of good plays, which results in something. I never thought for a second that we would come back and tie that game in the third quarter. Not for a second. But I felt like we were doing what, and we didn't score in the third quarter, but we were moving the football. We weren't going 3 and out. I wasn't throwing interceptions. I think we missed a field goal that we were in field goal range. So we drove the ball a little bit. So I didn't get benched. I was like hanging by a thread every series. And then we got a couple breaks, and it just, all of a sudden momentum. And I know there's a lot of analytics that don't believe in momentum. I think it's a very real thing. And a lot of it's mental, the confidence of seeing things work. You believe, and all of a sudden it makes things work better. All of a sudden you believe things are going to work. So you start to execute better. But it was just one play at a time. Let me do what I'm supposed to do on this play. If it works, great. If not, what's the worst that could happen? We were already down 31-3. It can't get any worse. So let me try to just plug away. And it just was kind of this mindset of just every play, do my job, see what happens. And we started to get some success. We scored the first touchdown. And I didn't celebrate any of the touchdowns in the game in the fourth quarter, because my mindset was, let's just keep going back and do it again. We have to go back. Defense, that was all I was doing. Every series, with the first touchdown we scored, I went over to the defense and said, get us the ball back. We'll see what we can do. Get us the ball back. And they did. Second series, it was 31-10. We get ball. With that series, we scored in 3 plays. That was all of a sudden it's only 2 scores and there's still 7 minutes left. Then it started to become a little bit more infectious, and the crowd started to get it back into it. But it wasn't a celebration. It was, get us the ball back. Give us another opportunity. And we did. And then it was we're going to score. It's just a matter of, can we beat the clock?
Yeah.
And that was, of course, what ended up our downfall, because we couldn't get there. But I think it's been a lesson for me, because I've had a lot of financial setbacks. I've had some other losses. I've been cut from, fired from other jobs. And it's, what can I do today that's going to build just a small building block, whether it's saving a little bit of money, whether it's, if you're working out, just do a little bit to get yourself a little bit better. What can I do today? And then you start building those blocks, and hopefully they build up into something. Like my first broadcasting gig that I did with ESPN, I was calling games on ESPN3. It was their only all digital content. I made $800 a game. And that first year I did 10 games. I made $8,000. And I was in a place financially where I needed to make more money than $8,000.
Mm-hmm.
But I was building blocks, and people were noticing, and, the higher up saw me and was like, oh, he's pretty good. So it presented more opportunities. So I just it's been a lesson I've learned from that comeback was, just keep plugging away and keep pounding. And it's a lot of it's cliche, but I do think it works. You got to take it one day at a time.
That's incredible. So you take that comeback, the choke-a-doke, and that's become your sort of life philosophy when you feel like you've been knocked down. And
for sure. I mean, we don't have too much time to get into it, but I made $7 million playing in the NFL. That was my career earnings, $7 million. And I made some really foolish, borderline gambling addiction problem decisions with the stock market. And it wasn't stocks where you buy and hold. It was futures where it's instantaneous. You're either going to win it or lose it. And when you see that 7 million go to zero, that is looking up at the scoreboard and saying, all right, it's 31-3. What am I going to do now? And that just happened to coincide with my career during that 2 to 3 year windows with what am I going to do? Because it was fulfilling for a while, because I felt like, man, I could be a day trader. This could be awesome. And I'd have days where I'd make 200 grand. It sounded like, whoa. And I was literally, I remember being so fooled by the dopamine rush that you get from gambling, because that's essentially what I was doing. I was not investing. I was gambling every day in the stock market. And I remember being so fooled after a day where I made 200 grand, maybe even 300 grand, and started looking for places to buy on the beach, $20 million mansions, thinking This is the goal. This is where I can be. And then, after a $200,000 gain day, it's $400 grand drawdown day the next day, and then you can really get in that full. And it was literally the toughest experience of my life. And one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn was this death by 1,000 cuts of, and it was really insanity thinking I can do this based on one good day. Then I'd have 5 in a row that were awful. But if I had, and it's like a lot of things, like golf, you hit one good golf shot, you think, oh, I can be a scratch golfer. Yeah. I'd have that one good day and I'd be like, man, I just need to put together 5 of these and I'm back. And it's the gambling aspect of it. I mean, how many people go to Vegas and you do the same thing at the blackjack table? I was just doing it at the biggest casino in the world, which happened to be the stock market. And everything was easily accessible online. You could trade, it's there. Yeah. I mean, it's easier. And the scary part about it is that it's like, if it was sports gambling, I'd have been the next Art Schlichter, who's one of the biggest like degenerates in the history of sports because he gambled and lost everything on sports. Because it was in the stock market, it's easy to justify to yourself, well, this is how people make money. Yeah. This is how people succeed. This is what you're supposed to do. And yet it was just a vehicle for gambling for me. But that was to the kind of the back. That was when I was at the lowest. My wife was, thankfully I married somebody who was going to stick by me and wasn't in it for the money and wasn't in it for the fame. But it was a really, 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 really tough time when it was like forced to make some really hard decisions. And one of the things I don't know, but I do feel like God's hand was in at work at it, because I mentioned the relationship with broadcasters. I don't know if I would have made $7 million and invested it properly. And that really, after taxes, it's like 3.5, right? Just to be, so it's not like 7 million in cash. But if I would have just managed that properly, given it to my investment and manager, and he would have set me up in some laddered muni bonds, and I would have been okay financially, I don't know if I would have gotten into broadcasting. I don't honestly know what I would have done. I might have been unhappy because I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have something that I love to do. So I feel like that was part of God's purpose for me to get me in this career, which I love. I love what I do, that it took something like that for me to be in a position where I would take a gig for $800 to call a game because I needed it. I had to do it. I had to do something. But I would have never moved to Connecticut in a million years if I didn't have to, because of the financial gain it offered. Like, it was a full-time paying job, but I was like, I have to do this. And like, thankfully my wife said, let's go, we got to do it. I would have never done that, which never would have given me the platform that I have now that's allowed me to do this for a living. So it's like, it all kind of comes full circle, and I see it now. But when you're going through it, it's back to those building blocks. Like, let me call these games and see what happens. Let me take this $800, set it, and let's just see what happens. And it's that was my mentality throughout that. When, you're looking up the scoreboard and your bank account says 0, or really close to it. It's like, yeesh, that's tough.
One play at a time.
Yeah.
I guess we got a couple more minutes. I had a couple of sort of rapid fire questions. I don't know if we'll get all of them, but what would you say the best advice is that your parents ever gave you, mom, dad?
I think first, my faith. I have my faith because of my parents, and it's not their faith, it's my own faith, but they did instill me the values, and, they introduced me to Jesus, which is like, I don't know how I would have survived any of this without having God in my life and a relationship with God. The other thing that my dad told me, and this was with all sports, and this is kind of more sports related advice, was you can't get too high with success or too low with adversity. And I think earlier in my career, you get caught up in that a little bit. Like, if I had a 3 interception game, I was doomed. I was like, man, I don't know if I'm good enough. I'm not, my confidence was shot. If I had a great game, I'd be on cloud 9 and be like, man, I don't need to do, like, I didn't have to go in early that week because I can throw 3 touchdowns and win. I don't have to do anything extra. You get kind of emotional in the ups and downs of life. And I think that's like it was a really valuable lesson, because I think people can do that. I think you absolutely have to enjoy the good moments, and you have to, sometimes you have to suffer through the bad ones, but you can't let them go to the absolute extremes. It's just because it'll be your downfall.
One of my favorite sports quotes to that is, you're never as good as you think you are and never as bad as you think you
Totally.
are somewhere in between,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
Any shows on Netflix or whatever you binge watch with your wife?
I don't know. The pandemic, like the shutdown, has really helped me because I've watched everything. I would say the most recent show I watched that I really enjoyed was Better Call Saul. I don't know if you've watched that yet. It's it. Because I love Breaking Bad and I hadn't watched it, and I think it challenges Breaking Bad almost to be better.
Really?
I think it's just as good. It's really solid. If you watch Peaky Blinders, that's an
Yeah.
old, I love Peaky Blinders. Currently, you know what I watched? I was watching a bunch of sitcoms. That's how bad it got.
Yeah, it was bad.
Like I watched Parks and Rec. I never watched it start to finish. Yellowstone, I've heard is good. I'm on episode 2. I just started that one, but it's about to with sports cranking back up, all the Netflix viewing is about to go by the wayside.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's probably a good thing because we've spent enough time in it.
Definitely.
I guess I'll close in. And by the way, we didn't touch on your turtleneck wearing fetish, so lucky. I'm gonna let you go there.
By the way, will you at least admit that I was the first? Because there is a trend now with turtlenecks. They're you look at NBA stars, Tom Brady's wearing them. I was the first. I was the very first to don the turtleneck of the second, because they were big in the 70s and 80s, but I brought them back in the 2010s.
I mean, that's not a badge that I would want to wear, but definitely you've got the turtleneck badge. So, so anyway, in closing, this is kind of a business tie-in, but we've talked about the comeback and leadership and what have you. What kind of business stuff or investments are you doing right now with your? Are you a stock guy? Are you
So I have been squirreling away to 401k because it takes a while to recover. That's the one thing that is hard, and they're still building blocks. I do. It's kind of hard though when I look at the stock market. There's temptation there for me. I got to be careful with that. But also, I do enjoy following it. During the pandemic, I'm like, man, I bought a Peloton. I'm like, I should probably buy some Peloton, and it's exploded. I bought a Tesla, and I enjoyed the Tesla. I'm like, man, this would be pretty good. So I see some ideas that are there. I think Bitcoin is fascinating, to see, is this sustainable? Is this, something that's going to go back up to 20,000 or, and it's on this kind of resurgence. I think, in general, I think our economy is probably going to be in a rough go of it, but a lot of it's probably determined on the election. But as far as investment properties, I'm just still getting back on track where hopefully in a few years I have some income to look at some different things and start to, get back with a lot more wisdom and a lot more actual investing as opposed to just gambling.
Yeah, everybody's got an opinion there, right? So
yeah,
and I don't know what's going to happen with real estate. There's a lot of people fleeing other states here, coming to Florida because of our tax laws. But now we have rising seawaters and hurricanes with insurance issues, and so it's never my crystal ball is still not working, but. I know we're pretty much out. What's that?
No one has it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for jumping on, Danny, and kind of sharing your story. I really enjoyed that. There was a lot of it that I knew, but some of it that I really didn't. So it was really enjoyable, and hopefully we'll do some more in the future.
Awesome, man. Appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to listening to guests down the road. I think you got something cool going.
Thanks a lot, Danny. Take care, man. See you soon.